Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Symbolism Happens Spotlight, the show where we highlight story of one of the members of the Symbolic World community. We talk about their interests, talk about their story, and how these ideas have an impact on their life. So today we have Sebastian. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
No problem. I'm happy to have you here. So, Sebastian, you have a very interesting life, very interesting story. So let's just dive right into it. Can you, first of all, walk us a little bit through your life journey? Maybe I know you did some mission work. Usually, I think at first in the Protestant church, then you moved. Well, you're transitioning towards Orthodoxy. So can you speak about your mission work? Can you speak about the motivations behind that, and then maybe the transition towards Orthodoxy?
Yeah, completely. So I was born in Colombia, in Cartagena. It's one of the main cities of Colombia, South America. And I was born in a Catholic background. I never fully interiorized the Catholic worldview, but as a background, I have that. So my parents, they would take me to mass up to until I was like 8 years old, and then they just get busy and they stopped taking me to mass. So that was pretty much my Catholic journey. And then my dad, he really planted in me this idea or this review of rationalism. So he always taught me to think critically, to never take anything for granted, to break down everything into the smallest pieces, and to be a self-teaching person. So that's my dad's philosophy, of life, and I really bought into it. I completely incorporated that into my life, and so I got this. I lost interest in in religion. I was just a normal teenager, just doing the normal thing. Um, Anime is not as weird down here as it is in the states, and so I would like watch anime or just go out and play with my friends. But then in my last year of high school, I had this amazing philosophy teacher, and he started asking very interesting questions like, can the human mind comprehend infinity, or can the human mind grasp eternity? And so I started thinking about these things, and I guess that's why my journey started. And yeah, that's when I became interested in the whole search for meaning, the whole search for God, for is there a creator? Does God exist? And all of that.
So,
And then,
like
yeah,
as your philosophy teacher was kind of challenging you to think more deeply about these ideas, have you sort of like did you see maybe some of the flaws, I guess, of rationalism that you had before, and if so, like what was that like?
yeah, that's a really good question. The flaws of rationalism came a little bit after, and because I tried to maintain my rationalistic mindset, but then I started to believe in Christ because my philosophical search made me say yes to an invitation. Like, I had this friend, and she invited me to go to the youth group of a Protestant church. And just because I was interested in those questions, I said, okay, why not? Let's see what I find in this random youth group. And so I went there, and I started believing in Christ while not resigning to my scientific mindset. And so
Hmm.
those were two forces that kind of competed with each other for quite a few years. And I did not know how to reconcile my rationalistic mindset with the faith that I now had and wanted to treasure. And so I started to, again, because of my dad's teaching, I started to like to teach myself about the faith, just going on Google and completing Bible courses and like doing it my own way. But then, yeah, the first crisis arrived because all of the information I was like all of the information I was putting in my head, they could not help me overcome sin, for example. Like, the information was not enough for me to overcome sin, to become what I wanted to become. And so I had this strong, how do you say, disjunctive between the information in my mind and what my body wanted to do. And so that tension drew me, or yeah, drew me to a mini crisis, because like, what's going on? I have all of this information in my mind. I have done so many courses, so many Bible studies, but I keep committing the same mistakes. So now, through the symbolic lens, we can understand that, and we can say, well, that happened because my theory of life was not matching reality. So my rationalistic approach to faith, that wasn't enough to account for the enigma of the human passions, the enigma of the human sinfulness. And so, but now I can understand that. But back there, I could not understand how it was that all of my Bible studying wasn't enough to basically transform myself. And so that caused a mini crisis. And but I decided not to resign to my faith. I didn't want to leave my faith behind. And so I was like, okay, I just need to keep studying. I just need to keep seeking information and finding the reason why this is not working. And so I left college. Actually, I was about to become an electronic engineering. I left my bachelor's degree, and then I went to study theology. I wanted to become a theologian to understand better why that was. And so that's when I traveled to Honduras. That's where I was going to eventually meet my wife. But I first went to understand this crisis, like why the information in my head doesn't match the reality of my body, basically. That was my crisis. And I know many people might identify with that struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't my theory explaining phenomena, basically? And so then I kept studying, and then I found this one book, man. This one book, um, like when you, in my experience, when you live in the Protestant world, you have access to all kinds of books, but you have no discernment. You have no way to know exactly which book is better, because I mean, the Protestant world struggles with the concept or the notion of hierarchy, and that struggle applies for many different scenarios. So if you go to a Protestant church, it's hard for people to think, okay, who in this church is more holy than, like, that's offensive in the Protestant world,
I know
like it's
exactly
all.
what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
remember having a conversation with my friends about this a couple of weeks ago. We were speaking about like, in speaking of holiness, sort of like, okay, would you say, you're more or less holy than, for example, St. Paul? And that question, even the just asking that question was like, that's not a question you ask. Even the
Yeah.
asking of it was offensive. So I can definitely relate to you when you speak about that struggle with hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it applies for people in a church, but it also applies to struggling to know which book is better than the other
Hmm.
book. You just like you if you go to a Protestant Western college, you're given a bunch of books and you're supposed to read them all, but it feels so flat. Like it feels so like it's just one more assignment. It's just one more book I have to get past. It's just one more thing to do. There is no hierarchy. And so finding a good book is like, I apply it to this Bible verse when Jesus says that when he sends one of his disciples to go in to fish, and he gets a fish, and then inside the mouth of the fish there is a coin of gold.
Hmm.
It feels like that. It's like you are massive um, in this massive sea of books, no hierarchy, no way to discern what is better, and then you find this one amazing book, and it feels like a coin of gold. And so I found that, and I found it right in the in the moment I most needed a book like that. So I think it was the one of the main experiences that I had of a miracle.
And
Like,
what was
I
that book?
love. So I mean, up to this day, like today, I would not recommend it necessarily, because
Okay.
I find that content way better in orthodoxy. But I'm gonna mention it just in case like somebody is interested. Is Grace Walk by Steve McVeigh. So he basically explains the principle of grace in a way I had never heard about, and it was the most freeing book I had read up to that point, because the main thesis of the book is you don't have to do anything to be loved by God. You know, like God's love is just there. It it permeates creation. It's the reason why creation exists. So you don't have to earn it. Like you're just a bunch of dirt, and you think you can earn God's love. You have to participate in God's love, you know. And so all of these feelings I had because of my long struggle with like human passions and like sinfulness and trying to change myself and never finding the transformation I wanted. All of that guilt was like in a way treated, or it really helped knowing that God's love is just something that makes everything possible in the first place, and that I just had to learn how to open my hands and partake in God's love, just like accept it. Um, that was just like one of the main theses. And so this book talks about um, how holiness descends from heaven. And Pageau, he talked about this in one of his recent videos. He made a video about Romans chapter, I think, 8 or 6. And he talks about how the difference between law and grace is that when you apply yourself to the law, you're trying to achieve holiness through the letter. But then in Christ, you learn to receive holiness as something that descends down to you, and that it transcends the law. It's something that you receive because you're part of Christ. So it's like a river. It's not something that you have to, I don't know, work your way through.
Hmm.
Although of course you have to, uh, join this spiritual path where you become more and more in touch with that. But in principle, God's love or God's holiness, it's something that descends down from the mountain, and that you have to learn how to partake in that. And so, I mean, it's a very mystical book. And just to not talk much about the book, I'm just gonna mention one more example, which is the story of Mary and Martha when Jesus arrived at the house, and Mary chooses to be at Jesus' feet, and then Martha gets frustrated because she's doing all kinds of stuff in the house. And then this author, Steve McVeigh, he says, you have to be first, like you first have to be Mary. You have to choose to be at Jesus' feet, and all of the other things will arrange around the fact that you're choosing to attend to
Hmm.
Jesus. Like if you train your attention, and now I'm speaking in more like Pajuan terms, if you train your attention to look at Christ and to choose to be with Christ, even if temptation arrives and you have every single reason to fear and to try to find your own way out of sin, just choose to attend to Christ, and everything else will slowly and painfully, but will arrange around that fact. So that was so freeing, man, because then I stopped finding so much information as I had been doing in the past, and I stopped trying to find my own way to transform myself, and I started to first and foremost attend to Jesus, attend to Christ, choosing communion with Him, even over my attempt to overcome temptation. Like even I wasn't even concerned with overcoming temptation more than I was concerned with having communion with Christ.
Hmm.
And that was a major turning point in my life. And that really brought a lot of healing to my life. And that's when I left my rationalistic mindset a little bit behind, because I had a, let's say, meta rational experience. Like, because I had tried so many things and so much information to accomplish something that I couldn't accomplish. Only when I decided to mysteriously attend to my Lord, then I accomplished a lot more transformation. And so it wasn't my intellect, it was my attention and not even my attention. It was my attention to Christ, which caused a lot more healing. And so that experience um, started making of my way of thinking a more mystical thing. So I didn't completely leave my rationalistic mindset behind, but then the mystical thinking, which is a very Eastern, started taking place, and so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what you're describing is something I've sort of experienced and I am experiencing right now. Whereas I feel like with the rational way of thinking, you often have this desire to go like wide, often just get as many data points as possible. Whereas with the more mystical religious way of thinking, you often go more, you have these simple on the surface truths, principles, and it's more so a contemplation, a meditating and just spending time with these realities, trying to embody them. And then you counterintuitively, in a sense, even get more out of the small, simple things by spending more time with them. And I feel like there's often this pressure to just, I don't know, maybe it feels more satisfying to get out there, learn more, get this extra book. But oftentimes what you have, like the treasure you have, just spending time with that and really going deep can bring a lot more like meaning, fulfillment. And it's always, at least for me, a constant struggle to resist going out to seek more when I know that I'm secure with what I have here. So I can definitely relate to
Yeah,
that also, just progressively going into a more mystical, religious, traditional way of knowing. And
yeah,
so like
yeah,
as
absolutely.
as you're going through that journey, you're progressively embodying this way of thinking, this way of living into your life. And can you maybe speak to what you've learned from that? What are some changes you made, things like that?
Oh yeah, like in more practical terms.
Yeah.
Yes, so that was part of why my journey didn't stop. So I found this book and it was amazing. It challenged me to focus on very few things. And as you were talking, I remember Matthew's terms like I learned a few beams of light from that book. But like how a beam of light, symbolically speaking, contains so much information that like you can attend to those few principles and you will not get any new things off of them because they are condensed like a condensation of meaning.
Mhm.
And so the principle to attending to Christ, there is a lot, like a massive amount of meaning and light there. And you will not exhaust the richness of training yourself to attend to Christ. But why didn't my journey stop there? Well, because I mean, again, I can now speak about it, but back in those years, I didn't know exactly why I was still feeling like I was missing something. But today I can say that my journey didn't stop because I was still lacking the embodiment. The embodiment, uh, like the ritualistic part of it. So I had this book, but I had no way to fully embody it in my life. But back in those years, I was just walking in darkness most times, like most of the time. And so I kept studying. And actually, I have to be honest and say that so that book brought a hype in my spiritual life. But then with a few years or months, or yeah, like months and then years, I was again feeling very low and very slow in my spiritual journey, my spiritual transformation. So it felt like this in my life journey, but then I was again like feeling like I was coming down the mountain and I
Mhm.
had no method to go back, like to go back up. I was still treasuring the principles of that book I read, but they weren't enough. I needed more earthly specific techniques to maintain that journey. And so I found myself still wanting to do more research, and I wanted now to go more into the Eastern tradition. I wanted to read more mystical books. Um, but then I went to the mission field. I found this book in my last year of college, which was in 2017, and that was a great thing for my life. But then I graduated, I became a theologian, and I went to the mission field. And I was like 22 years old, very young to face the challenges of being in the mission field. And so that was very difficult for me. It was very hard for me to maintain that spiritual freshness while facing the mission field. And then that made me just, I need to keep searching, I need to keep finding answers. And one day I jumped into, have you heard about the Bible Project?
Yeah, they're
So
like
I
that
found
YouTube
that.
channel that makes these like video summaries of various books of the Bible. Is that?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm talking about. So they are Western, but they even like every year, with every new set of videos, I just feel they're getting more and more Eastern, and I really appreciated that of their videos. So you can still tell they are Western, but they have more mystical approaches. And so I appreciated that, but then that wasn't enough. And then I jumped into the political sphere. My mind opened to the political world, and so I started listening to Ben Shapiro and other thinkers from the right wing. That wasn't enough, for all the young people that join these political movements. They know deep down that that's not enough, and so then I
I
jumped
think just
into,
to pause on that, I
yeah,
think you're touching a very important point because politics it does this weird thing where it's an easy way to embody theory. Like it's a pretty easy way to embody theory. You have this political
yeah,
ideal, this political philosophy that your party holds to, and you have these gatherings and your town or city, people you participate with, rituals you have. Like it's a very easy way to
yeah,
fulfill sort of an ideal. But again, I think it leaves you in a sense with this feeling that something is missing, something deeper is missing. Like this cannot just be it.
yeah. That's so right. If we think of the cosmic mountain versus the political lifestyle, it's like you get stuck in the middle because it
Mm,
doesn't go as deep as you need, and it doesn't go as high as you need.
mm.
It's like getting stuck in that intermediary public sphere, but never getting to your passions that you need to get rid of or handle, and it never gets to the top of the mountain, which is the source of everything, the source of why we're doing this ritual, why are we doing this procession, like all of those activities we do in the political sphere. All of that can only be explained from the top of the mountain. So you do things without knowing how to explain them,
Mm.
and then you do things that doesn't help you with your deepest things. So yeah, so that wasn't enough. And then I got into Ben Shapiro. That wasn't enough. Like he's great, but he has his flaws. Yeah, whatever. And then I jumped into Jordan Peterson,
Mm.
and that was a really good step for me at the moment, right? So I devoured the psychological significance of the Bible. I devoured that series. I loved it. But then, like, it's like we have that intuition, like, okay, I completed this series of videos, but I still hungry. Like, I'm still hungry. I need to keep finding for answers. And then this famous interview he had with Jonathan Pageau, where Jordan cries and he says how Christ is the joining of the narrative and the what, like the narrative and the I forget the other term, the historical, like
Mm.
how Christ is the joining of the narrative and the historical. And that's the first time I knew about the Pajas, like the first time. So I jumped into Jonathan's channel. I first struggled to understand his videos, but little by little, I kept getting more and more of his videos. Then I was really getting his ideas, and I could not stop watching his videos. And then I jumped into the church fathers. Like as a theologian, I had to go to the source, and I started reading Saint Maximus the Confessor and Saint Ephraim the Syrian and all of these Eastern church fathers, um, and also Matthew's book. I read it. I don't know how many times I've read that book. I mean, mean, I'm translating that book into Spanish, and so I had to have read it
You read the book a lot.
so many times. Yeah, and so yeah, that's been my journey, and now after all of that research and so much time watching videos and reading, I now understand that we need embodiment, but we need a kind of embodiment that goes all the way up and all the way down. Like we need to find a group with a set of rituals, a set of of rituals and practices that help you both with the lowest parts of you, and that also answer those like the super high questions of the origin of everything,
Mhm.
and where everything comes from, and where are we all going, and what's going to be, or how to interpret reality. Like we need to embody something that is so massive that can satisfy both your intellect but also your body. And so that's what my wife and I are doing. We are transitioning into the Orthodox Church because we find in that church um, truly the body of Christ in a cosmic, massive sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Seeing the walk of your life, seeing your journey, and as we were speaking a bit offline, um, you mentioned that you found this anchoring in which I think is a very special place to find it, which is the book of Numbers in the Bible. You mentioned how you've been diving deeper into that book and seeing how it can relate to us today and how it can help us with this embodying of these spiritual realities and principles.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, because my journey has been so existential. Like all of the things I've learned about, or most of the things I've learned about, I have learned them wanting to heal, basically, wanting to live a fulfilled life. So my journey is not the journey of a person that is just curious about ideas. I was like all of these years, I have been searching the meaning of life and how to fully access reality, how to fully live, and how to fully exist, basically. And so, yeah, right now I'm fascinated by the book of Numbers because I see in the book of Numbers the key, or a set of keys on how to enter the Garden of Eden in an upside down world. Like that's how I call it. The book of Numbers is a guide on how to enter Eden in an upside down world. It's so inverted, but it shows you how when the world is as crazy as it is today, we can still access Eden. And that's just fascinating because it's a message that is meant to be embodied in these times of upside down world. So yeah, we can talk about it for a little bit. So for example,
Mhm.
the first key to me, like to understand the significance of numbers, is how it's all inverted. So if in the Garden of Eden the only commandment was not to eat from that fruit, not to eat from the fruit of the garden of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's very interesting how in the book of Numbers, when the Lord sends this spice you say the
What do
yeah
you
right
mean?
this like when God sends spies, I think you
Yeah,
say.
spice. You're good.
Yeah, right. I get confused with the word spices for food. I was not sure.
Okay.
So yeah, when the Lord sends spies to go and see the land, then when the spies come back, the Lord says you have to eat from that fruit. It's like the opposite,
Mhm.
because the spies they bring back amazing and like giant fruits, which proves how abundant the land is. And so there you have the first interesting inversion. In Genesis, God says, "Do not eat from the fruit." In Numbers, God says, "You must eat from that fruit." And so that speaks on how when the world is upside down, we have to kind of allow God seduce us. It's like God becomes something like the snake, and that's connected to why God asked Moses to put a snake on a pole. But that's God's snake. That's not the snake. Like that's the opposite, let's say, of the snakes that are devouring the people in that moment. And so it's like when the world is upside down, we have to let God seduce us, similar to how a snake tries to seduce us. Like we have to, let's say, believe again that a different reality is possible. And so you have this inverted picture where God is saying to Adam, let's say, Adam, eat of the fruit. Like, trust me, like, try the sweetness of this fruit. And I think that's what's happening. That's part of Jonathan and Matthew's role. They are like recapturing the the imagination of young people mostly. They are like seducing young people again into believing in this re-enchanted world. So it's a type of seduction, but it's a good seduction because we're being invited to believe again that the world is meaningful, and it feels like an invitation, like a snake trying to to convince us. And so that's like the first interesting
Mm.
inversion. Um, and then another inversion is that in Genesis 1 and 2, there is only one commandment. And that commandment is, again, do not eat from that fruit because God has arranged the entire Garden of Eden. It's all balanced out. Time is not fighting against space, like time and space are balanced, and heaven and earth are not fighting against each other. They are balanced. And so, like, God creates this amazing, perfect Eden world. And so, everything is so perfect that there is only one commandment. And if Adam and Eve would have stayed faithful to God with that one commandment, everything would have stayed great. Like Matthew says in the language of creation, how because of how Eden was perfectly arranged, just a little effort was necessary to maintain the balance. Just a little effort to take care of the land, and that would have sufficed. Like that would have sufficed. But then, in the book of Numbers, you have the opposite. You have a bunch of commandments so they can enter into the promised land. Like you have a growing law, and every like as you advance through the Torah, more and more commandments are added and added and added, like layers of commandments. And so it's the opposite. And so I think that's why the Orthodox Church and also the Catholic Church are becoming more and more interesting in the US, especially. Like so many people are running to parishes with the Orthodox Church. They're also joining parishes of the Catholic Church. It's because when the world is upside down, when meaninglessness is like the law, then we become hunger for laws. Like we become hunger
Mm.
for direction. We start seeing commandments not as a burden, but as beams of light that can actually guide me. So when a nihilistic teenager starts listening to Pageau's videos, then he's like, oh, so there is meaning in life. And if I do this set of things, I can increase the meaning in my life. And so all of the sudden, going to church becomes like a bright and like an amazing thing. And all of a sudden, I don't know, loving your neighbor, doing a prostration, going to a group, going to confession, all of a sudden, all of those things become interesting, or they become like attracting to us. And so
Mm.
I think that's why. And so you see it in the book of Numbers, a bunch of commandments that Israel had to follow to be able to enter in Eden, whereas in Genesis 1 it was just one commandment. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think on that point in particular, it's an interesting like reframing where the I would say reality of it doesn't really change. If I can use an analogy, I'd say it's like seeing the walls, the rules, the constraints around you, or the rituals around you as a prison wall versus as the wall guarding you from the attacks of the enemy, right? It's the same walls, and you're inside the walls regardless. But depending on your perception and perspective of these walls, they can mean wildly different things, and one of them can be detrimental to you, and one of them can make you realize that, oh, okay, these are like guardrails, these are guideposts to help me actually go deeper into what I want. So I find it
Yes.
interesting that you make that connection between the increase of the law as the world gets more split and fractured and chaotic.
Yes, yes, and I think many young people are going through it right now. You know, they are growing in it, and they are being told life is meaningless, and they believe it, and so they become depressed. And then when they hear commandments, like to them, it might be amazing to
Hmm.
have a like a direction, to have those poles, as you mentioned, that can guide them into life. And so I think that's why people are becoming more and more interested in the Orthodox and Catholic Church, because those are way more embodied traditions.
Yeah.
And so they become like places with a bunch of lights, a bunch of poles to regain meaning in one's life. So, and you see it in the book of Numbers. God giving a bunch of commandments so they can enter into Eden. And that's completely inverted because, again, in Genesis 1 and 2, it was just one commandment, just one, because they were in the garden. And so, and then another aspect of Numbers, and this one is very fascinating to me, is the role of the feminine. And I see a lot of Pageau's work as a feminine move in today's world. So you have this moment in the book of Numbers. It seems like it makes no sense. Like, why is this story here? Like, right in this moment. And it's when a group of women go to Moses, and they go all the way to the door of the tabernacle. And this group of women, they say to Moses, hey, we have no brothers, and but we don't want our like, we don't want the last name, or we don't want the name of our father to be lost
Mm.
just because there are no men among us. So give us the piece of land that was supposed to be given to a brother that we don't have. And so if you see it and you compare that to Genesis 1, again, it's inverted, because in Genesis 2 and 3, sin entered into Eden because of Eve in first place. Then Eve gave the fruit to Adam. But here in the book of Numbers, you have Eve, let's say, like the feminine parts of Israel, bringing a riddle to Adam, to Moses. But this is the thing: in Numbers, the feminine, the riddle that Eve brings to Adam is right. Like, they are right. So it's like this complex inverted picture where in Genesis, Eve brings a riddle that cannot be solved and that causes the whole breakdown of the garden. But then in Numbers, this group of women that they represent Eve, they bring a riddle and they are right. And then Moses said, yes, you're right. I'm going to give you a piece of land. So, like in this case, Eve is right. And so, how do I connect that to Pageau's role, or Pageau's work? Because, like, you know how is uh, the feminine frames reality. It's like the frame, right? And so the work of the Pageau brothers, they have been reframing things this whole time. Like, they have been saying science is not enough, or there is a structure that science depends on, and we have to pay attention to that first structure before paying attention to science. Or this video where Jonathan says science is nested in religion.
Mm.
Like, that whole thing, that's like a reframing of the world. It's like Eve bringing a riddle that needs to be attended for us to be able to re-enter in Eden. Because in the book of Numbers, this group of women, they are presenting this riddle so they can enter into the promised land, and so they can have their own piece of land. And the law needs to be updated because of the riddle of this group of women. So Moses says, you are right, I'm going to give you your piece of land. And then that gets somehow added to the laws. And so now like because of Eve's riddle, now the law adds that anytime um, there is a group of sisters and there is no man to inherit the piece of land, then you shall give that land to the women. So it's like so crazy, it's like so inverted. Eve brings a riddle that updates the law so they can enter into Eden. And and again, Jonathan has been doing that. He's been challenging the mindset of the West, reframing the questions that need to be asked and addressed, and that is allowing us to regain meaning. That is allowing us to again find our way to enter Eden, even in these crazy times. So he says, "Go to church." Like when he says go to church, he's reframing the whole question. Just go to church,
Mhm.
read the fathers, pay attention to this bunch of old people that wrote letters thousands of years ago. He's reframing. So it's like an Eve bringing the riddle that we need to respond to be able to enter Eden. And lastly, the another fascinating inversion is that so in Genesis 2 and 3, the monsters are outside of Eden, right? Like the sea monsters
Mhm.
and all of that. But in the book of Numbers, the giants, the monsters are inside Eden. And that's just crazy. So what do you do when in order to enter Eden, you have to fight. Like you have to fight giants to regain your way into Eden. And that just speaks of how hard it is. And I think any teenager that went through a nihilistic season and now tries to become Christian, that person will understand that like that person will have to fight a lot of giants in his life with like maybe opposition from his family, opposition from the political world, opposition from government, but that's what it takes. So this like the book of Numbers is not a romantic book because it's basically saying you have to fight the giants. You have to more than ever go back to fasting. You have to go back to the prostrations very diligently. You have to go back to the church fathers and confession. That you have to do all of those things more than ever so you can have the spiritual strength to fight the giants, the political giants, the like all kinds of giants, so you can enter Eden in an upside down world. So this is not romantic. It's a very challenging call that we have. So that's just so fascinating.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that seriousness of it and that maybe even the dryness of the book in and of itself. Like I don't think you necessarily catch all these things
Yeah.
on the first read just because you're so bogged down by all the rules and all the things that happen, and it's such a grindy, slow story. But I think that also serves to speak to the difficulty and reality of the battle, which is it's not going to be easy. Like the world is inverted, and to think that you can go back to Eden in this state, it's just kind of like a reminder that it will be difficult, but it can be done, and people are trying
Yeah.
to do it. And if you just associate with the right people, again, band around these rituals and that rich understanding of the world, um, it can be done, albeit in a difficult way.
Yeah, it can be done. And just one last thing about this book of Numbers. I was going to say that I mean I have not found many support for this, but I think this is the reason why Moses is prohibited to enter the promised land. Like he committed a small mistake, a tiny mistake. He's told to speak to the rock, but he hits the rock. And you might say, like, why God told Moses, "You will not enter the promised land," just because he didn't speak but hit at the rock. And I think that's part of this whole narrative, like this inverted narrative, where maybe in a normal world, God would be compassionate for small mistakes. But when the world is inverted and you are supposed to lead a group of people to enter Eden, you have to follow exactly what God is saying. It's like when you are in a moment of chaos, you have to become the most faithful vessel for the logos, for heaven. And if you commit even one tiny mistake as the leader in an upside down world, that is enough. Like that will suffice for you not to enter. And so again, this is not a romantic book. It's like saying you have to work the hardest, you have to follow God's laws in the most exact way. Otherwise, you will not enter because Moses didn't enter because of one tiny mistake. It's just crazy. But again, like as a young people, I find this book in a way encouraging because, as you were saying, it is possible, and at least the Bible warns you of what you have to do. And I mean, I do want to taste the riches of Eden,
Mm.
even if we are like in an upside down world. I do want to get into Eden, and if this is what it's going to take, as a young people, I find it oddly compelling or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, it also like it poses the challenge, and it also gives you like a key into the challenge, which is Christ, right? Like we were talking about before, just constantly keeping that focused on that, and
Yes.
it also gives you sort of like a solution to the challenge. And as we begin to wrap up the interview, one of the really cool things you're doing is you're actually translating Mathieu Pageau's book into Spanish. So I wanted to talk to you about that. Like, how's that been? Start off with what was the motivation for translating it into Spanish?
Yeah. Well, the main motivation is uh, mm, like finding something to do for the symbolic community,
Okay,
like
interesting.
like knowing that I can play a real role in today's movement. What I believe it is a movement from God. Uh, I mean, that's enough motivation, like knowing that I can be part of this larger thing that God is doing. And I don't know what the extension of this movement is going to be, but just knowing that I can have a role, that I'm in a proper place, in a proper moment to be a bridge to make this book accessible to the Spanish audience. That's just mind boggling. And also I'm in this weird transition because I'm still in the mission field, but I've already delegated most of my church roles. And I'm just waiting, honestly, for the time to come, for the plane ticket to come, for me to move to the States with my wife. And so I happen to be in this unique situation where I have a bunch of time available. I'm just
Mhm.
waiting for the time to leave. And so I have to use my time wisely. And honestly, there were days where I worked on the translation for like 12 hours. I would only stop to like get my bones moving, have lunch or have breakfast or have dinner, and then I would just go back to the computer and keep working in the book. 12 hours in one day, 10 hours, 8 hours. I just loved it. And so it's a very unique situation. I'm in the right place, let's say, to make this possible. I have a bunch of time a bunch of time available. I want to be part of this movement, and so yeah, that's basically the background of
Yeah,
the
and
work.
can you also speak to some of maybe the challenges that are involved in translating such a special book? Because we're not just talking about maybe translating like a story or something like that, where um, it's more so the syntax, the grammar, maybe the logic of it. But with Mathieu's book, you also have the whole symbolic language, and the language, well, in English, it forms this web of connections. The different symbols play off of each other. And so how do you translate the book while also keeping this interaction between the symbols and stuff like that?
Yes, that's a really good question. So of course, I would have to read every single paragraph several times, and I would have to compare because yeah, as a person that is making this book accessible in a different language, I have to pay more attention to the meaning, to the net of meaning within the book, and that's like what I needed to focus on for the net of meaning to be preserved from one language into another. But I mean, if we apply the symbolic worldview into the translation work, we know that there is always a reminder, like there is always a reminder when, like, within a system, when you try to integrate raw matter, into a system, there is always
Yeah.
that reminder. Um, but I mean, as long as the reminder is not the stumbling block, right? That's going to bring the entire book down. If it's a reminder that we can, let's say, allow to happen something small, I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
But so yeah, the main focus is preserving the nets of meaning from one language into another. And of course, another big challenge was the graphics. So many graphics,
Yeah.
a lot of work with a Photoshop, editing all of those graphics, re-exporting those graphics. Also, the formatting. You know, when you change from one language to another, maybe one paragraph is smaller or bigger, and like because of how Spanish normally has more words than English. Like English is like more compact
Hmm.
or compact. I don't know. Uh, then very often I end up having larger paragraphs, but then I have to fit the graphics. But like of
Mm.
course
Yeah.
because of how Matthew wrote the book in English, he had no trouble with this. But when you try to fit a similar set of graphics with larger paragraphs, you have to like become an artist of editing, like to find your ways so there is similar how the graphics match, because I want people to have a natural experience of the book. I don't want one chapter to say, I don't know how to explain it. Like if in the normal book, in the English book, the paragraph starts saying, as you see in the graphic above, and the graphic is above. I want in
Yeah.
Spanish to also put the graphic above, but maybe the paragraph before the graphic is too large for that to happen. So like you have to play with all of those spaces, and that gave me a lot of work. But it's so satisfying to find your way out and make the book feel natural again, like in a different language.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. I would not have thought the graphics would be an issue, but when you mention it, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's tricky to navigate that. And can you also maybe speak to the learning experience? Like I know
Mm.
me personally, as English is my second language. I learned French first. Reading a book in French always feels more, you know, at home. It always feels a bit better. I always feel like I understand it on a deeper level when I read in French versus English. So you personally, have you sort of experienced that as you were translating the book, going back and forth between these two languages?
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah, when I started reading the book, like when I started reading my own translation, it felt so odd at first. Like, but there is no way you can completely maintain the feeling. You know, there is no way you can completely maintain that first original feeling. You have to kind of accept it in the first place, like get accustomed to a new, I don't know, let's say a new spirit
Hmm.
of the book. And so I just had to accept that and just focus on, okay, so it's not gonna feel the same. It's kind of odd, but I'm gonna preserve again the net of meaning, right? Choosing the right words. Like there are some key words I had to carefully choose. So for example, I'm just gonna give you an example. Matthew uses the word inform a lot in his book. Like inform, which comes from Latin, like in form, that which adds form to the meaningless matter. And
Hmm.
so he loves using that word in the book, or at least in the first part. But then in Spanish, I doubted keeping the word inform, which in Spanish is very similar in terms of how it's written, is informar.
Hmm.
But yet I doubted because it sounds so odd, but I know it kind of sounds odd also in English. Like I know there is an intention on why Matthew decided to use such a, let's say, enigmatic word as inform, to refer to how heaven shapes earth, or to express how heaven comes down to earth and brings forth creation. I mean, you can say heaven is informing matter, but it sounds enigmatic.
Mm, yeah,
And
definitely.
so at the end, I was like, it sounds odd, but I think this is part of the intentionality of Matthew. And so I'm gonna keep the word informar, even though I know the readers will find it odd. I think this is part of what he wanted to do. Like he wants his book to be technical. He was a mathematician,
Mm.
and so I'm gonna keep it technical, enigmatic, and odd, just to preserve the spirit of the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's amazing work you're doing, truly, like translating that book. Um, he's already a French speaker, so I don't think I'll be useful for a
Yeah.
French translation. But if any other people in the Symbolic World community are interested, I think this is a really, really cool step, because these ideas
Oh
are
yes.
obviously, I think, super important. And I think as members of this community, we recognize that. And to be able to have more people read about them in a language they can understand, I think is always it's always a great benefit and a great service to people. So thank you really for the work you're doing.
Yeah, of course, it's a pleasure. It's a privilege. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to get this book published in Spanish, and I have already created a few social accounts exclusively dedicated to the book. I'm already doing interviews in Spanish, and I'm uploading clips of those
Nice.
interviews to get people curious. And I learned so much. Like when I translated the book, I noticed I hadn't even grasped like the depth of that book. I kept learning and learning and learning by translating the book, getting deeper insights into Matthew's book, because symbolically speaking, his book is a very dense beam of light.
It's
And
very
so the
dense.
more you read it, the more you get off of it. So like whoever is going to translate this book into French or well, yeah, it's already in Portuguese, but in in any other language, those people will have the privilege of learning so much more from
Hmm.
that book.
And just on a slight tangent, how is the Symbolic World community in Spanish? Like, is there a big symbolic community?
Well, I mean, not really. It's just starting, I would say.
Mm.
It feels very scattered at the moment. Just recently, like just a few weeks ago or 1 week ago, a Spanish symbolic chat group was created within the symbolic Facebook group. So
Okay.
now we have that, and that was created by the admins. But that was just like that just happened a week ago. So that gives you an idea on how just now we're getting things moving in the Spanish. And so, like part of my mission, I think bringing this book into the Spanish audience is kind of trying to work so that scatteredness that I feel in the Spanish world reduces, and so
Mm.
we can start seeing a symbolic movement in Spanish happening soon. So, but there is a lot of potential. Like in symbolic terms, I know there are a lot of fans, bilingual fans following Pageau, following
Yeah.
Matthew, uh, and the first biggest challenge will be to get these ideas into people that are not bilingual, like to get only Spanish speaking people interested into symbolism. That will be a big challenge.
Yeah, well, I think you're at the forefront of doing that, and I think you're a good person for that. So thank you so much, Sebastian, for this interview today. It was a pleasure talking to you. And do you have, maybe you want to promote the book, or links to interviews you've done, YouTube videos maybe you make? Do you have anything of the sort?
Yes, I'm gonna. Well, I mean, I don't have it right here, but I can share with you some links in case people are interested. So
Okay,
we
perfect. We'll
can
put
put those
those.
links underneath the this video. Yeah.
All right, perfect. We'll do. So again, it was a pleasure interviewing Sebastian, and talk to you soon, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Frank. Yeah, thank you so much.